first thing I want to do is go over some photography um, uh, vocabulary. See, my vocabulary is not coming smoothly. But here we go. So I just went to Wix.com blog on photography, and it's a photography lesson. Um, so I'm just going to go over these words that we didn't really learn very much in our previous lessons. The aperture. Aperture is the opening that the light goes through on your camera. Aspect ratio is the difference between the length and the width as height. It's about like the size of your photo. If we move on to B, the blue hour is that short period of time before sunrise or after sunset with the sun just below the horizon. It's a really beautiful color of light. I don't really have a familiarity with the bokeh, but that is the out of focus kind of fuzzy balls in the picture. Bracketing is when you take the same picture from different exposures so that the same picture looks different. We did learn about the bulb and shutter speeds, but we probably didn't cover it very long. That lets you get longer exposures, like if there's less light, so it lets more light in. And on our digital cameras, we can take a bunch of shots all at once. I can hold my photo button on my iPhone and it'll shoot like 10 pictures in a burst. A candid, that's what we all take when we're in our parties with our friends or out at the park, or your brother's being goofy or your cat's looking cute. That's a candid. Chimping, that's when you check your photo every single shot. We don't need to do that. Live in the moment, snap lots of pictures. Let's go on to composition. It's how the objects are positioned in the photo. If you guys remember, we talked about like not putting poles behind our heads when we take a selfie. Things like that. Not making it look like we're growing out of a tree or a tree is growing out of us. And the contrast is about the shadows and light. Some of our pictures in my little game today do a lot of playing with shadows. We never dealt with cropping, and we're going to before our scavenger hunt. The cropping um, I'm sorry. The cropping is when you change the size by cutting off parts of your picture. We have depth of field. That's the distance between the closest and farthest object. If you guys took some nature pictures, maybe you had trees and streams. We didn't really talk about diaphragm. That's the part inside the camera that controls the opening for letting light in. And dynamic range is the range of the light of the image from its lightest to its darkest. See, my dynamic range keeps changing as I create shadow of the light in my kitchen. Exposure is the amount of light that comes into the camera. I'm going to skip over EV compensation. Focal length is the distance in millimeters between the center of a lens and the camera sensor. Oh my gosh, these camera parts. I don't know all of these things. But I do like that golden hour right before sunset and after sunrise. Do you guys remember back at the beginning of our alphabet what the hour before sunset and after sunrise was called? The blue hour? Okay, I'm going to scroll on. JPEG is one of the terms that we use a lot with digital photography because that is the acronym for um, most of the files that we save in digital photography. Um, a light meter. We don't use that a lot with our digital photography, but a lot of our cameras have a built-in light meter so that they know how much flash they need and things. A macro is an extreme close-up photography. Have you ever seen those extreme close-ups of like the insides of a flower or all the way close up to a hair so that you can't tell that it's a hair? It looks like it's a it's a landscape. If you can put the camera in manual mode, then you can adjust the things like the light and the aperture and the exposure rate. Since we do a lot of digital photography, our digital photos contain a lot of metadata, which is a fun library term too. Librarians use metadata as it's information about information. So in that file, there's information about where it was taken, when it was taken, different little bits of information is saved in that digital kernel. But noise is something that in traditional photography we want to reduce. We don't want tiny distortions. Overexposure is when you get too much light, so you don't end up getting a good picture because it washes it out. The pixel is also really common in digital photography. It's the part of a digital picture. It's the like smallest unit. And when we go over our organization of our photos, basically our scrapbooks can be our portfolios, our collection of photos. We don't need to go on that. I like that they say quality is highly used, but it's vague. We like to look at the quality so that we can see how well we can understand what the pictures that we've taken if we can tell where they're from. And raw is also, these are a lot of digital photography terms. We're going to have images with very little processing where we aren't going to change colors or light. And we have the resolution in megapixels, and saturation is the color intensity, and we can change our saturation. And even in digital online photos, a lot of people change their saturation with filters. My camera comes with automatic modes. Like if I'm using sport mode, it takes a faster picture, or in portrait mode, it takes a more a slower still picture. So our shutter speed is the length of time the camera sensor is exposed to the light. Oh, the tonal range, the different darkest to lightest tones. But an underexposure is when the photo's too dark. Sometimes like we can't use a flash, but there's not enough light, or we can't hold our camera still enough to let enough light in, and then we get an underexposed photo. I'm not really familiar with the Adobe things. A watermark is really important when we talk about like owning your creative property. A lot of photographers and artists will put a watermark on their work so that someone can't just take it and copy it and say it's their own. That's about respecting people's intellectual property, what they've created. White balance is something that you do to adjust so that your camera recognizes what an absolute white is. A lot of times now our cameras just automatically recognize it. But we can manually do that if we want to play with our digital. They did some funny things here. A yellow filter is a color filter on black and white photography. Color filters block some colors from reaching the center, and it changes the tone of the picture. And zoom is something so that we can change the distance that a subject is from us without having to walk closer or farther away. I know that was a really quick little thing, but I wanted to cover some of those terms.
I wanted to go over quickly some different things about pictures. So we talked just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So here we have a picture of portrait versus landscape. So the one on the left, this one, is landscape mode. So that is like long rectangle style. And the up and down one over here is a portrait. And those are different ways that you can either take pictures, but you can also print things that way. You can also crop things that way. So which we'll talk about here in a second. So I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that landscape was sideways and portraits up and down. So you might have pictures in your house. So if you can see the one behind me, that is landscape. So it's long, it's the sideways rectangle as opposed to the up and down rectangle. So I just wanted to make sure we all have that in the background. Another aspect that I wanted to cover real quickly is in this picture, we have that red dot is the focal point. So I know it's a little weird picture, but I wanted to make sure that we covered. So there could be different ways that we would need to make sure that our focal point. So I just wanted you to make you think, and same thing with like portrait, especially with portrait mode, of what is a focal point? What are you really taking that picture of? And it might surprise you. It might not be, after you look at the picture, it might not be what you actually thought you were taking a picture of as the actual focal point of a picture. So I'm going to show you a little bit about cropping. And cropping just means to discard the unwanted portions of the image and kind of preserve what the most important part is. I will say that most photographers crop all of the images that you see, if not like a good portion of them. And that's why sometimes when you go to a photographer, it takes a while for you to get the pictures back because they're editing it and making sure it's actually that focal point, like we talked about just last slide, is really the focal point that they want in the pictures. So it's not resizing the images, but it's taking parts of the pictures out. And then repetition, so that always makes a very interesting kind of picture. So I'm just going to show you really quickly here a little bit about cropping. You can crop, and I'm no expert, but I figured I could impart some knowledge on you about cropping. And you can do this right here, and you're going to see it as I do it in, what is this, Google Slides. But there are ways that you can do it through Internet Explorer, or not Internet Explorer, Windows Explorer, the Photos option, other ways too, and some of those that Miss Donna sent us last time. But cropping is fairly easy. So I'm gonna, since we saw many faces of Pepper here, I figured that we could easily kind of show you how to crop them. So as you can see, we see lots of background here around Pepper, but so she's kind of getting lost in the focal point. If we really want to make her the focal point of this, I'm just going to click up here and get my cropping tool. And I'm just going to pull it over. And so now Pepper is, but you see that she's really long. So if we wanted to focus on her face, then we're going to cut out some of her body as well. And so now you can kind of see that we took her image and we cropped out what was around her. So we really are focusing on her face. So that's really making sure her face is the focal point of this picture. Same with these pictures up here. So you can kind of see that it's the doorway, right? But if we don't really want the doorway in our picture, we can crop that doorway out. Oh, that is the opposite of what I wanted to do. I think I clicked on something wrong. So now you can see that we don't have that door frame in our picture. We really are focusing on Pepper here. And you could do the same thing with these other images. So hopefully that will help you a little bit. There are little things that you can do, little edits to your pictures that really make some of your pictures really stand out when you just do a little bit more than just taking the picture. There's some back end work too. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more help while you take pictures. Bye, everyone.